The three-masted vessel, the Holy Virgin of the Winds, left Le Havre on the 3rd of May, 1882, bound for the seas of China, and it was not until the 8th of August, 1886, after 4 years of wandering, that it entered the port of Marseille. Having discharged its initial cargo in the Chinese port for which it was destined, the ship immediately received a new charter for Buenos Aires, and from there proceeded with goods to Brazil. New voyages, breakdowns, repairs, long calms, sudden hurricanes that blew it off course. In short, all the vicissitudes of fate, the misadventures and misfortunes that lie in wait at sea, had long kept this Norman three-master away from its native shores, and it was now returning to Marseille with its holds packed with American canned goods and tins. At the time of departure, the ship's company, not counting the captain and his mate, consisted of 14 sailors, 8 Normans and 6 Bretons. Upon its return, however, only 5 Bretons and 4 Normans remained. 1 Breton had died on the way, and the 4 Normans, lost under various circumstances, had been replaced by 2 Americans, a Negro, and a Norwegian, hired one evening in a Singaporean tavern. The great ship, with its sails furled and its yards crossed, crept slowly behind a Marseille tugboat, which, puffing, forged ahead through a slight swell that gradually subsided into the windless calm. Having passed the Chateau d'If, it sailed between the gray cliffs of the roadstead, shrouded in the golden haze of sunset, and entered the old port, where vessels of all nations and sizes, of every shape and rig, crowded side by side along the quays, creating a veritable jumble of ships in the narrow basin of stagnant water, where their hulls jostled and rubbed against each other, as if steeping in their own brine. The Holy Virgin of the Winds took up a position between an Italian brig and an English schooner, which made way to admit their new neighbor. When all the customs and port formalities had been settled, the captain allowed the greater part of the crew to spend the evening ashore. Dusk was falling. Marseille was lighting up. In the sultry air of the summer evening, over the noisy city, full of shouts, the rumble of wheels, the crack of whips, and southern exuberance, hung the spicy smell of food, richly seasoned with garlic. No sooner had they set foot on land than the 10 sailors, borne for so many months on the waves, set off slowly, with the hesitation of men torn from their familiar element and unaccustomed to the city. They walked in pairs like a procession, swaying slightly, looking about them and gazing eagerly down the alleys leading to the harbor, tormented by a longing for love, intensified by the last 2 months of their voyage. At their head marched the Normans, led by Célestin Duclos, a tall, strong, and shrewd fellow who became their leader every time they went ashore. He knew how to find the lively quarters, was given to clever tricks, and disliked getting into the brawls so common among sailors in port. But once drawn into a fight, he feared no one. Having wandered hesitantly through the dark little streets that ran down to the sea like sewers, saturated with a heavy atmosphere, the very breath of brothels, Célestin chose a winding alley where lanterns hanging above the doors burned with large numbers on a frosted, colored glass. Under the narrow archways of the entrances, women in aprons, looking rather like servants, sat on chairs. Catching sight of the approaching sailors, they rose, took a few steps towards the gutter that ran down the middle of the street, and blocked the path of a line of men, who were moving slowly, humming and smirking, already aroused by the proximity of these prisons for women of the town. Sometimes, in the depths of a vestibule, behind a suddenly opened door covered in brown leather, a stout, half-naked woman would appear, her full thighs and fleshy calves sharply outlined beneath coarse, flesh-colored cotton tights. Her short skirt resembled a bulging belt, while her flabby breasts, arms, and shoulders showed as a patch of pink against a black velvet bodice trimmed with gold braid. She would call from the distance, "Come on in, handsome boys," or else run out into the street, and, grabbing one of the sailors, drag him with all her might towards her door, clinging to him like a spider to a fly larger than itself. The man, excited by her closeness, would offer weak resistance, and his comrades would stop and watch, torn between the temptation to enter immediately and the desire to prolong this thrilling stroll. But when, after a desperate effort, the woman managed to drag the sailor to the threshold of her dwelling, where the whole gang was about to pile in after him, Célestin Duclos, who knew about such places, would suddenly shout, "Don't go in there, Marchand. This is not the right place." Obeying his call, the sailor would break away with a sharp movement, and his friends would move off again in a crowd, while obscene curses from the infuriated woman followed them. And from the other doors in the alley, attracted by the noise, more women emerged, filling the air with their husky promise. The sailors moved on, further inflamed by the enticing calls and allure of this chorus of love's priestesses waiting for them on both sides of the street, and by the foul abuse from another chorus, the offended women they had passed over and left behind. Occasionally, they encountered another such band, soldiers whose weapons clinked as they walked, sailors from other ships, or solitary townsfolk, minor clerks. New little streets opened before them, narrow, lit by the dim flicker of suspicious-looking lanterns. For a long time, they trudged through this labyrinth of dens, over sticky cobblestones where foul-smelling rivulets trickled between walls packed with female bodies. Finally, making up his mind, Duclos stopped before a relatively decent-looking house and led his whole crew inside. They made a proper night of it. For 4 hours straight, the sailors reveled in wine and women's caresses. Their 6 months' pay vanished without a trace. They settled into the spacious hall like owners, casting hostile glances at the establishment's regulars, who huddled at tables in the corners where one of the unoccupied girls, dressed as a young girl or a music hall singer, would serve them before sitting down beside them. Each sailor, the moment he crossed the threshold, had chosen a companion and did not part with her all evening. Simple folk don't seek variety. Shoving 3 tables together and draining their first mugs, the now doubled procession, the sailors, now matched by an equal number of women, filed upstairs. For a long time, the sound of footsteps on the wooden stairs could be heard, until the narrow bedroom doors swallowed up this string of amorous pairs. After a while, they all gathered again in the hall for another drink, then went back upstairs, only to return once more. Thoroughly drunk, the sailors were bellowing at the top of their lungs. Their eyes were bloodshot. They pulled their chosen women onto their laps, roared out songs, yelled, beat their fists on the tables, and poured wine down their throats, giving free rein to the beast slumbering within man. Amid the noisy band of his comrades, Célestin Duclos, his arms around a stout, rosy-cheeked wench who sat straddling his thighs, gazed eagerly into her face. Less drunk than the others, though he had drunk no less, Célestin still retained some clarity of thought and, growing tender, felt an urge to start conversation. But his thoughts were muddled, slipping away, returning, and vanishing again, and he couldn't quite recall what it was he meant to say. He smirked, muttering, "Well then, been here long." 6 months now, the woman replied. He nodded approvingly, as if this testified to her respectability, and asked, "And do you like this sort of life?" She hesitated slightly and answered submissively, "You get used to anything. This works no worse than another. Whether you're a maid or a tart, it's all the same." He seemed to agree with this truth. "You're not from here?" he inquired. She shook her head silently. "From far away?" She gave another silent nod. "And where from?" She thought for a moment, as if trying to remember, then whispered, "From Perpignan." The sailor beamed again and exclaimed, "Is that so?" Then it was his turn for a question. "So you're a sailor?" "That's right, pretty one. Come from far away." "I should say. I've seen plenty of places and harbors and all sorts of things. Maybe sailed around the world. Even, you bet, and more than once." She fell silent again, as if trying to retrieve something long forgotten from her memory, then asked in a different, more serious tone, "Have you seen many ships in your voyages?" "You bet, my dear. Did you ever happen to lay eyes on the sailing ship, the Holy Virgin of the Winds?" He smirked. "Sure have. Saw her just the other day, in fact." She turned pale, all the blood draining from her face. "Truly? Is it really true?" she asked again. "The honest truth. You're not lying?" He raised his hand. "I swear to God." "And do you know if Célestin Duclos still serves aboard her?" He was astonished and grew wary. Before answering, he wanted to find out what lay behind this question. "You know him?" Now it was her turn to become cautious. "No, it's a woman I know who knows him." "From this establishment?" "No, from the next one over." "On this same street?" "No, not far from here." "What sort of woman?" "Just one like me." "What does she want with him?" "How should I know?" "A countrywoman of his, probably." They stared intently, searchingly at each other, vaguely sensing that something fateful was about to arise between them. "Could I perhaps see this woman?" the sailor inquired. "And what would you tell her?" "I'd tell her that I've seen Célestin Duclos." "Is he well?" "None the worse for wear. A sturdy fellow." She fell silent again, gathering her thoughts, then said slowly, "And where was the Holy Virgin of the Winds bound?" "Here, to Marseille." She shuddered involuntarily. "Truly, truly. You know Duclos personally?" "I do." She thought again, then murmured quietly, "I see, I see. What do you want with him?" "Listen, tell him." "No, nothing." He didn't take his eyes off her, feeling his bewilderment grow. Finally, he resolved to get to the bottom of it at all costs. "You know him yourself, don't you?" "No," she replied. "Then why do you ask about him?" Suddenly making up her mind, she jumped up, ran over to the counter where the proprietress was sitting, grabbed a lemon, cut it, and squeezed the juice into a glass. Then she filled it with water and handed it to the sailor. "Here, drink this." "What for?" "To clear your head. Then I'll tell you something." He drank it obediently, wiped his mouth with his hand, and announced, "Done. I'm listening. Promise me you won't tell him you saw me, and you won't reveal who you heard it from. Swear it." He raised his hand and gave a mysterious smile. "I swear it." "Your word of honor?" "My word of honor." "Then tell him that his father died, and his mother died, and his brother too, all three in the same month of typhoid 3.5 years ago, in January of 1883. Now, it was his turn to feel his heart clench. He was so shocked that at first he was lost for words, but then doubt stirred within him. "Are you sure?" "Sure." "Who told you?" She placed her hand on his shoulder and, looking him straight in the eye, said, "You won't give me away?" "Swear it." "I swear. I am his sister." Her name escaped his lips involuntarily. "Françoise." She stared at him intently, almost fearfully, and suddenly, overcome by uncontrollable terror, her lips barely moving, she whispered, "My God, is that you, Célestin?" They froze, their eyes locked. Around them, Célestin's comrades continued to roar wildly. The clatter of glasses, the pounding of fists and heels keeping time, the women's shrill shrieks, all merged into a deafening chaos. He felt her beside him, warm, terrified, his sister, almost soundlessly, afraid of being overheard. So faintly she could scarcely make out the words. He whispered, "Damn it all, what have I done?" Her eyes instantly filled with tears, and she moaned, "Is it my fault?" Suddenly he asked, "So, it's true they're dead?" "Dead. Father, mother, and brother. All three in the same month, as I told you. I was left alone, penniless, with nothing but rags. I still owed for the medicine and the doctor, and I had to sell all the furniture to bury the three of them. Then I went into service with Monsieur Cacheuse. Remember him, the lame one? I had just turned 15. When you left, I wasn't even 14. I sinned with him. We're all foolish in our youth. Then I became a maid for a notary. He seduced me too and rented a room for me in Le Havre. But he soon stopped coming. For 3 days, I went without a crumb of bread. There was no work. And so, I went to a house like this. I wasn't the first. And I've been so many places, all over, Rouen, Evry-Lille, Bordeaux, Perpignan, Nice, and now here in Marseille. Tears streamed from her eyes, coursed down her cheeks, and fell into her mouth. She spoke through sobs. "I thought you were dead too, my poor Célestin." He murmured, "I didn't recognize you. You were so little then, and now. Why, you're a beauty. But how did you not recognize me?" She waved a hand in despair. "I've seen so many men, they all look the same to me." He couldn't tear his eyes from her, gripped by a vague but all-consuming anguish that made him want to scream like a beaten child. He still held her, sitting on his knees, his arms around her shoulders, gazing more and more intently. He finally recognized the little sister he had once left in their homeland among those she had been forced to bury while he sailed the seas. Suddenly, he cupped her head in his rough, callous palms and began to kiss her, as one kisses only their own flesh and blood. And then sobs, heavy, manly sobs like ocean waves, broken like drunken hiccups, burst from his chest. He wept, repeating, "It's you, Françoise, my little one." Suddenly he sprang up, slammed his fist on the table, overturning and shattering the glasses, and roared with all his might. He took a few steps, staggered, stretched out his arms, and crashed to the floor. He rolled about, beating his fists and feet, and groaned as if in his death throes. His comrades, watching the scene, merely roared with laughter. "Now he's really plastered," remarked one. "Someone should put him to bed," said another. "Or he'll end up in jail if he goes outside." Since the sailor still had money in his pockets, the madam offered a bed, and his friends, themselves barely able to stand, hauled him up the narrow staircase to the room of the woman who had just been with him. She sat until morning on a chair by the bed where her brother lay, weeping as bitterly as he had. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I'd be happy to chat with you.